Welcome back to Viper Bites primetime preview, and this is it. This is the finale. Win and you're in. 9-7 Chargers, 9-7 Las Vegas Raiders. Whoever wins this game is on to the playoffs. I mean, what more could you ask for? The very last game of the season determines who the very last team is to get in the playoffs. Unless, of course, they tie and Indianapolis loses. Of course, we're recording this before Sunday night kicks in. But listen, how exciting is this game going to be? And I know both Chargers fans and I know Raiders fans, there is a lot of anxiety in there. You both believe in your franchises, but you both know the history of both your teams. Sometimes Chargers are going to Charger. Sometimes Raiders are going to Raider. I get it. I feel you. I know this pain. But we're going to dive right into this tail of the tape because this is it. This is the last primetime preview of the season. I mean, we'll probably talk about a little bit of the playoffs here, talk about those matchups a little bit later, but let's find out which one of these teams, based on what we're about to talk to, is going to punch that ticket into the playoffs. Because honestly, right now, I don't know. I can see this one going either way. This is a push for me when we're talking about the Chargers. They look like the better team, but hey, the Raiders are winning. I don't know how they're doing it. It's kind of like the Tennessee Titans. How are the Titans the top seeded team right now in the AFC? No one can explain this to me. No A.J. Brown, no Derrick Henry for a good portion of the year. You have to hear the Titans. What about the Raiders? We'll talk about that in a sec. But let's talk about the Chargers first. Now, Justin Herbert, 4,631 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. Number 2 in fantasy with 367 fantasy points on the season. Last week, the Chargers handled the Broncos with ease. So Herbert had kind of a modest game, throwing for 237 yards and just 2 touchdowns. Just 2 touchdowns. Now, in fact, the last time in which Herbert failed to produce at least 17 fantasy points was back in week number 8 when the Chargers lost 27-24 to the Patriots in a game in which Herbert also threw 2 picks. Now, we know this is a big game, not only for the Chargers, but for the Raiders. We talked about this win and you're in scenario for both these franchises. Now, these teams met back in week 4 in Los Angeles, a game in which the Chargers won 28-14, and Herbert, he only went 25 for 38 for 222 yards, but he did manage to throw for 3 touchdowns in that contest. Vegas is 12th in fantasy points per game allowed to the quarterback position and have allowed 26 passing touchdowns along with 225 yards per game passing, which is a drastic improvement on what the defensive numbers were showing last year. So by no stretch of anyone's imagination, is this going to be an easy game? Now, the Raiders are going to be missing a few people in that secondary, more than likely like Nate Hobbs, for example, which we won't get into that. But where the Raiders have struggled this year has been stopping running backs. And Austin Ekeler, 847 rushing yards, 612 receiving yards, 14 total touchdowns. Yeah, the Raiders are going to have their hands full. Now, while this pass defense of the Raiders has been improved, they have allowed 1,528 rushing yards to opposing backs this season, along with 600 receiving yards. Now, when you look at that from the fantasy perspective, the Raiders were the 3rd worst team in fantasy points per game allowed during the 2021 campaign. Now, it may surprise some, but Ekeler has not had a 100-yard rushing game this season outside of that game against the Raiders. Okay? Now, look, in that game, he averaged 7.8 yards per carry and finished with 117 rushing yards and 28 more on 3 receptions. Now, lately, the Chargers have been giving Justin Jackson a little bit more run here, giving a few more touches, and he's looked good. Over the last 3 games, Justin Jackson has touched the ball 48 times and produced 322 yards. Those numbers also include a start back in week 16 when Ekeler was unavailable due to the COVID, in which he ran for 84 yards and also had 8 receptions for 98 yards in that loss to the Texans, which is key because we like to talk about the Chargers should be the dominant team, but they also lost to the Texans just a little while ago. So I don't know what to expect in this one at all. What I do know is Keenan Allen has been a good receiver much of the season. He's been a top 12 receiver, in fact. Now, we keep taking him for granted. Maybe he's just one of those guys that we just love to hate or love to underappreciate. But year in, year out, he's flirting with 100 receptions, and he did it again this year. Those 100 receptions were tied for 5th in the National Football League. And now he also sits 13th in receiving yards with 1,086 as he heads into this game. Now, we mentioned that the Raiders' pass defense is much improved from last season, And the Raiders will look to duplicate that performance back in week number 4 when they held both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams to a combined total of 8 catches for 47 yards, with Allen being responsible for a majority of those with 7 of those catches and 36 yards. Yeah, that's right. Mike Williams had like 1 for 11. Now, Mike Williams, he has been the second option for the Chargers most of the season when he's been healthy. But Jalen Guyton, Joshua Palmer, they've seen plenty of action as of late. As the season comes to a conclusion, the Chargers have some decisions to make pertaining to this offense. And you know what? Let's just focus on week number 18. We mentioned that back in week 4, Williams wasn't good. It was actually Jared Cook who led the Chargers in receiving. 6 catches, 70 yards, 1 touchdown. That stat line, unfortunately, was good, but Cook's not going to be available for this one, but we'll touch that here in a second here. Now, listen, Williams is going to have to step up in this game, or possibly Joshua Palmer or Jalen Guyton or one of these young receivers has to step up and have that defining moment of the season if the Chargers are hoping to get past the Raiders in this contest. Or perhaps it's going to be Steven Anderson or Trey McKitty that could take advantage of this Raiders' porous defense against the tight end position. Vegas has allowed opposing tight ends to convert 87 receptions this season into 938 yards and 10 scores. Those 10 touchdowns are the 3rd most allowed and are 2 fewer than the Los Angeles Chargers have allowed this season. So more on that in a moment. McKitty got himself involved last week in this offense against the Broncos, finishing with 3 catches and 23 yards. But now let's turn our attention to the Las Vegas Raiders. And we talk about how we like to make fun of Keenan Allen or underappreciate Keenan Allen. I'm not sure there's anyone who's more underappreciated than Derek Carr. I'll say it. I'll be the first one to say it. Now, Derek Carr, 4,618 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. Derek Carr sits 13 passing yards behind Justin Herbert. And these AFC West rivals, they sit 3rd and 4th in passing through 17 weeks in the entire National Football League. It may also surprise you fantasy enthusiasts that Derek Carr, he finished the fantasy season, yes, I'm counting week 17 as the end of the fantasy season, as a QB1. He's the overall quarterback 12 in fantasy. And that's with 21 passing touchdowns. Just to kind of put it into perspective there. Yeah, that still doesn't sound right. It doesn't seem right. Now, we like to take shots at Derek Carr when given the opportunity. I'm guilty of that as well. Now, when you think of quarterbacks pushing the ball down the field, Carr's name is certainly one that does not come to your mind right away. However, his 65 completions of 20 or more yards ranks 2nd. Yes, 2nd. Last week, Carr didn't have the best game at all. We can look at that, but he led the Raiders in that 2-minute drill to get them into field goal position to knock off the Colts in what I would consider a playoff game for both the Raiders and the Colts heading into that one. So maybe the Raiders are already coming into this one with a little bit of being a little playoff tested, so to speak, thanks to that game against the Colts. Now, Carr hasn't thrown for more than 300 yards since Thanksgiving, and he will certainly need to be able to do that here against the Chargers. Last time, week 4, in that loss to the Chargers, he was 21 of 34 for 196 yards with 2 touchdowns and an interception. This Chargers secondary is no joke. They've been solid most of the season, much like the Raiders. Now, Josh Jacobs, he hasn't been good all year, but somehow through 17 weeks, some way, he has finished as the RB13 in fantasy football in PPR scoring, despite playing only 14 games. His 740 rushing yards ranks 25th, but his 8 touchdowns, that ranks 9th as far as rushing touchdowns are concerned. Now, Jacobs has had at least 70 scrimmage yards every week since week number 11 and 19 or more touches in each of the last 3 games, as the Raiders have learned to kind of lean on him a little bit more while Waller has been out. Jacobs will be looking to improve on his numbers from the last meeting against the Chargers, in which he only had 40 yards rushing on 13 carries. He did add 17 more yards on 5 receptions in that contest. Now, Los Angeles, they have struggled against opposing backs for the most part. Now, look, I'm going to list off here the last 4 games. The Giants, Saquon Barkley. The Chiefs, Darrell Williams. The Texans, Rex Burkhead. The Broncos, Javonte Williams there and Melvin Gordon, they have allowed 435 rushing yards, 131 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns to those backs over the last 4 weeks. So there is an opportunity for Jacobs to have a big game. He's going to need to produce this week for the Raiders to have a real good shot at this one. Now, speaking of milestones, Hunter Renfrow, 1 reception away from 100 on the season. Yeah, that's right. He's one behind Keenan Allen. Has there ever been a player less recognized for 100 catches than Hunter Renfrow has been this season? Now, even last week, 7 catches on 9 targets, including a touchdown, that basically has gone unnoticed. Did you know that? Do you remember that? Probably not. Put your hand down. You're lying anyway. Now, he is 7th in receptions while he's 19th in targets, and he has shown how efficient he can be this season. That is basically working out to a catch catching 80% of all his targets, which is right up there with the best of them. Renfro will be in tough, though, against this Chargers secondary. We mentioned how stingy they can be all season. They've surrendered the 4th fewest fantasy points per game, and like the Raiders, have only allowed 10 touchdowns to opposing wideouts on the season. Then again, one of those touchdowns that they've allowed was to Hunter Renfrow in that Week 4 contest. So, hey, who knows? Now, speaking of wide receivers that have kind of maybe come out of nowhere, how about Zayd Jones? Zayd Jones! He had his first 100-yard game of the season against the Colts, and he hauled in 8 passes for 120. Now, Jones has had at least 50 receiving yards in each of the last 3 games while recording 25 catches over the last 4 contests. Vegas may have found that third option behind Renfro, behind Waller in the past game. Now, Jones has had 5 or more receptions in 5 of the last 6 games, with the Chargers putting a little more attention on Renfro this week. Maybe a player like Jones or perhaps Deshaun Jackson will step up and help the Raiders punch that playoff ticket for the first time since 2016. Now, here's where it gets interesting for me. Darren Waller has more career touchdowns against the Chargers than he has against any other team. Now, Waller has not been ruled out for this one, but the likelihood of him playing looks slim at this point, and he's been out since basically Thanksgiving. So if he is available, that is a huge boost for the Raiders as he averages 5 receptions and 60 yards per game against the Chargers on his career. And we mentioned the Chargers' woes against stopping the opposing tight ends, as they have allowed 12 touchdowns to tight ends this season and have surrendered 1,091 yards. If Waller is out, which I'm anticipating, it will be Foster Moreau once again looking to exploit this matchup. Back in Week 4, Waller had a touchdown to go along with his 59 yards and 5 receptions, while Moreau has 16 receptions for 180 yards in those 5 games post-Thanksgiving, but he has failed to score in each one of them. I think if Waller is out, this is a good opportunity for Foster Moreau to step up and get that touchdown. Now, like I said, Chargers going to Charger, Raiders going to Raider. Your bet is as good as mine when it comes to who's going to win this one. But the best bet you can make is signing up for that subscription at fantasypoints.com. They will take care of you. I promise you that. And as always, give a good old-fashioned thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button. We got plenty more coming here. We got Dynasty Stashes. We got player previews. We got the Viper Cast on here. You name it, we got it. Make sure you're tuning in.